Love it. Hey everyone, Falcon Pro Mike McClelland, and we're here at Table Rock Lake doing one of the things that I absolutely love to do in the fall, and that's catch them on a jig or a hard head. The biggest thing about this lake, there's 2 or 3 things that I'm really going to focus on. When you start talking fall fishing, you're either going to catch them on a jig relatively shallow or you're going to catch them extremely deep. And the one thing that comes in common on both these setups is I'm going to be looking for places where you've either got long sloping points that fall off into deep water in a fast manner, or I'm going to be looking to fish channel swings when I'm up the river fishing shallower. There's my jig, see him chasing it? I got him. Got me in it again. There it comes. One tree I saw on live scope and I could see 3 or 4 of them around it. Get on in here. He wasn't very happy coming through that treetop like he did. That right there is why live scope is so important, man. I pulled up there, I kept seeing that one tree out there. I could see some fish moving around, and just on a little 1/2 ounce hard head on a 5172 Cara. I mean, just a nice little keeper, not anything big, but anytime I'm fishing a jig out deep, or even shallow for that matter, I just feel like that little bit of chartreuse on the tips of that trailer really makes a difference. You know, if anything else, it just gives it a little more flash, gives it a little scent. And then the other thing it does is if they're feeding on brim at all, it makes that jig really look like a brim. So basically setting out here on this point, it's a long sloping point, but it's got a channel swing just that comes in just out here outside me a little bit. I mean, I'm in 40 foot of water, and you know, if I move the boat 20 or 25 foot, it's what I was talking about earlier. It's one of those places where it drops off to 70 or 80 foot of water just that quick. And these fish, when that thermocline breaks up in the fall, I mean, they do one of 2 things. They go super deep or they go to the bank. And you know, the fish that go to the bank, when you got the right conditions, you can catch them on a crankbait or a moving bait. But when you get slick, calm conditions like this, a lot of times you have to resort to a jig, and you either get up there on the bank and fish for them shallow, or you get extremely deep out here. And I can see these fish, and it's actually a tree laying on its side, big root ball, and I can see fish moving all around it. Just caught that one largemouth out of it, and there's a whole school of them in it, but for some reason they're just not cooperating right this minute. So basically this is another one of them places, when you see these really tight contours, I mean, that essentially is where you've got a sheer drop. So I mean, it's 100 foot deep right here, and then this shaded, pink shaded area is like 35 or 40 foot. So these are the kind of places that I'm really going to key on. Anywhere you've got that underwater channel that swings up against one of these long sloping points are the key places. So really one of the biggest determining factors for me is kind of how aggressive the fish are, and if I can really pinpoint where they're at. A lot of times these fish will really get pinned to the bottom, where even with live scope you have a hard time seeing them. And if I'm trying to just cover a lot of water and trying to maybe fire up fish that are stuck to the bottom, I generally like to throw this hard head because you can just cover so much water. Once, you know, I kind of pinpoint where the fish are at, or if they're in brush or trees or something like that, that's usually when I'll go to that football jig, when I'm trying to zero in on a specific target. But this hard head is definitely the way to cover a lot of water and really figure out where the fish are positioned and how they're wanting the bait presented. That's the other thing important about when you're throwing that hard head, is having a high gear ratio reel. I'm throwing an 8-3 to 1. I mean, when they get it, a lot of times they'll absolutely slackline you. And spotted. That's a fat old spot right there. Fat old spot on a 1/2 ounce hard head with a big bite kamikaze craw. I mean, that is a good spot. Those are the kind you like to weigh. Look at that belly. Love it. The biggest thing about what I'm doing here is, I mean, I'm keeping that bait in contact with the bottom all the time. Even though I'm maintaining a slow retrieve, you can see every now and then I'll just kill it, let it fall, make sure it's definitely on the bottom. There, one just bit it. I'm going to just keep winding until he loads up on it. There he is right there. But that rod just gives to them, and I mean, that's what you're looking for in a jig rod. I mean, that's the reason on this lighter line stuff, I want to throw, you know, 12, 10-pound line. I'm going to use that 5172. I mean, it's just the perfect rod for that application. And then when you get into those situations where you're catching bigger ones or fishing around heavier cover, then that's where I go to that 6174. They are eating that thing though. I mean, they're putting it away. That is fun. Yes, it's fun. Get back out there and get another one. I've got them fired up. I don't know that it really matters what I'm throwing in there, so I picked up my 6174 with the 3/4 ounce football jig. It's heavy enough that I can keep it down a little bit better even on this heavier line. Didn't eat that football jig quite as good as they've been eating that hardhead. Nope, they just don't want that thing. Oh, he got it that time. Another good one. That's what football jig fishing is all about. First one was the best one though. That's a solid keeper. Ate that football jig too, didn't he? Look at that. This was a good stop. So this is one of those places that, I mean, they just pretty well, you can always count on fish living here. I mean, it's almost a year-round kind of place. We're right here in the big major bend of the Long Creek arm of the lake, and these fish typically position in such a manner that I fish it with the current. And when I say that, whatever direction, you know, the current would be flowing because of the pull from the dam. And today I pull up here, I'm idling around, looking around, and I really just don't see anything. And I was fishing it from deep to shallow, and I actually have pulled up here on top of the biggest high spot on the hump, and I'm actually throwing out and pulling my bait against what would normally be the grain that you would fish this. So, you know, it's something every now and then you got to change angles, do something a little bit different to get these fish to fire up and bite. Basically what we've got here, when you see me zoom out, I mean, this is the actual point behind us. And then when you zoom in, you can see where this point runs out. You've got that steep channel side right here, and then there's actually a high spot right here. And those fish are actually positioned right there in that saddle off the back side of that high spot is where they're positioned. You know, another thing that I just sitting here thinking about, I mean, this is one of those patterns that really is 2 times of the year. I mean, this is the very same pattern that I would typically fish in the pre-spawn period. You know, a lot of times when these fish get done spawning, they actually will go the deepest that they're going to go right after they spawn. And then as the water temperature starts warming up and the lake forms a thermocline, they actually start coming back shallower. But this is definitely something that isn't just tied to the fall. I mean, you can catch fish post-spawn, pre-spawn, doing this very same thing, and even during the winter. Went back to that hardhead and got another one to bite it. He was coming at me so fast I couldn't hardly catch up with him. It's another pretty decent one. He isn't as big as I thought he was. But they are still eating it. That right there is the reason they're out here eating. And that is all about matching the hatch. See the copper flake that I got in that? It's a little color called Ozark craw, and it's designed specifically to have that little orange effect, a little bit of purple. I mean, it's got every color that you could possibly want. And that's the reason they eat that hardhead so good. You heard my drag slip a little bit. That's another key when you're only throwing, you know, 10 or 12 pound line. That's another reason, you know, that you want this softer tip on this 5172, because when you lay into them like that, I mean, you don't want to break your line. So this rod is just the ultimate light line offshore fishing rod, and it's good for other things. I mean, I throw a swim bait on it. I throw a lot of different baits on it. Look at that. I'm talking about not catching any largemouth, and all of a sudden they show up. That's a solid little keeper. I mean, that's a 15¼ inch fish. It's a good one. Go back and grow up. All in all, I feel like we had a pretty good day. You know, just a kind of a quick look back on what went down today fall fishing a jig and a hard head on table rock, I mean, like I said, the fish are either going to be super, super deep or they're going to be relatively shallow. We tried to catch them shallow and didn't really do it on a jig up there, but definitely got on a hard head bite, you know, throwing a 5172 on a high-speed 8:3-to-1 gear ratio reel. It took me a little bit to get the fish fired up, but once I got them fired up, I mean, we caught them pretty good. I think I had, you know, fish probably 8 or 10 casts in a row, caught a couple largemouth on some isolated key trees and things like that. But then once we got them fired up on the hard head, I was able to pick up a 3/4 ounce jig on a 6174 jig rod and catch them a little more effectively. You know, when you throw that lighter rod, that 5172, I'm usually throwing 10 or 12 pound test line, so you need that lighter action rod, a softer tip. But once you get them fired up, if you're fishing specific targets, this 6174 is really the rod I like to use. And even when it comes to skipping a jig around boat docks, I mean, pretty much all the jig fishing, Carolina rigging, anything I do that I'm really wanting to feel a bait, I'm going to do it with one of these two rods, the 5172 or the 6174.